Hey there everybody, Seja here, and welcome to part 2 in our Alchemy and Herbalism series. And in last week's video, I was sharing with you how, throughout history, as science kind of became more of the dominant worldview, we see this kind of mechanistic model and really kind of stripping the spirit and the meaning out of, cultures and systems and traditions. How that affects our perspective of people and plants and really ultimately our practice of herbal medicine, and how alchemy is this incredibly potent and sophisticated system and tradition that allows us to bring those two together. But how exactly does alchemy do that, right? How does alchemy unite the science and the spirituality of herbal medicine? Well, that's what I want to talk about a little bit more in this week's issue in this series, and talking about one of the core, the philosophical foundation of alchemy. As I mentioned last week, everything in this tradition is about coming to a balance of philosophy and practice, right? That there's a certain way of looking at and understanding the world around us and kind of the fundamental pattern of nature that is the philosophy of alchemy. And then we want to, do something with it, right? We want to practically apply that philosophy, and that ultimately becomes the practice, right? Which really, to me, the kind of quintessential practice of alchemy really comes down to medicine, right? It comes down to preparing medicine as well as administering medicine. So there's kind of the herbal pharmacy side of things and the therapeutic side of things, which is what I'm going to be talking about in part 3 and part 4 of this series. But first, we got to get solid in, understanding this core, really the core philosophy of alchemy. And I think it's summarized very nicely in the age-old adage that I'm sure you've heard before, as above, so below. And this is really a pretty old saying, but what does it really mean, right? As above, so below. Well, really, what that means is that really the whole and the part are connected, right? That the above, the cosmos, the great pattern of the natural world and creation, the above, or what traditionally is referred to as the macrocosm, is mirrored in the microcosm, in individual species, that the whole and the part are ultimately one, that the whole is within the part, and that the part is a facet of the whole. And this is a really profound teaching that I remember, I first learned about this in my early 20s, and it was like, it just totally blew my mind, right? It was like, wow, like the whole universe is interconnected and everything is one and everything is in this, grand web of interrelatedness. And that's really profound and mind-blowing, and I don't know what to do with that, right? It was kind of like, the philosophy made a lot of sense, but it wasn't until I really got deeper into alchemy that I realized, wow, they're actually taking this very profound understanding of the world and then applying it in really profound ways that is helpful, right? In the way that it heals people and helps people and in a medicinal context. So we have this dynamic of the macrocosm and the microcosm, and as above, so below. And really in alchemy, the center of that philosophy is really this understanding that nature is not chaos, nature is not random, that there is an underlying order to the cosmos within which we live. And within that underlying order, there's a certain pattern. There's a pattern to creation. There's a pattern to life, that there's a rhythm to, the way the seasons turn and the way that the stars are placed in the sky and the way that the planets orbit around the sun and the way that plants grow and the way the water cycle is and the way, everything about nature occurs accordingly to these natural laws, to this underlying kind of cosmology and fundamental order of the universe. And that really is what their understanding of the macrocosm is. And so what is that pattern, right? Well, again, we just turn to nature, that there's a fundamental pattern in the cosmos, and the alchemists understood that the order of our solar system, right, that the way the solar system is structured is a reflection of how everything in life is structured. And they also looked to nature, right? They looked down here on the earth and saw the elements, right? The earth and the water and the fire and the air and the space, that is another underlying order or pattern of creation that kind of determines the qualities and the characteristics of the whole and of the part. And so these two kind of layers of energetics is the way I like to describe them. The 7 planets of our inner visible solar system and the elements here that we see here on this earth form this fundamental blueprint of the natural world. And it's really kind of at the foundations of the pattern of the macrocosm. And so what alchemy does is it takes that and it shows how everything in nature, all of the plants and the animals and the stones and the minerals and the people, right, all contain that underlying pattern within them as well. That we as a human being contain those planetary qualities within us, that we contain those elemental virtues within us as well. And what makes us all different and so varied is that we all have them in different relationships to one another, and some are in greater excess and some are more in deficiency, some are expressed, some are not expressed, but they're all present within us. And I'm sure, as you know, really astrology, the whole system of astrology is really built off of that understanding. And so I want to take a little bit of time to kind of look at what this does for our understanding of people and of plants, like how we see the macrocosm in a person, how we see the macrocosm in a plant, and how that shift again in understanding really changes how you're going to approach working with people and plants as an herbalist, right? So if we're looking at a person, well, the way we typically look at a person, as I was kind of briefly mentioning last week, is, as an herbalist, someone comes to us and they're looking to us for help, oftentimes with the physical body, sometimes more on a psychological, emotional level, but also sometimes on a spiritual level. And that's one of the other kind of fundamental organizational structures in alchemy, is what they refer to as the 3 principles, that we all have a body, a spirit, and a soul. And we can experience, this is the kind of the fundamental breakdown of a person, is that we have that, right? We have our physical organs and tissues, we have our spirit, our mind, our psychology, our emotions, and we have an essence, we have our soul. And oftentimes, in more of a, reductionistic or mechanistic or not holistic understanding, those parts of the self are always seen as separate, right? And we have, one way of looking at the body, maybe we look at it through the lens of science and anatomy and physiology and biochemistry, or maybe we look at it through, more traditional lens, such as energetics, looking at someone's humors or their doshas or their constitution. Either way, we kind of have this one set way of looking at the body, and other ways of looking at the mind and emotions, and other ways of understanding the soul, but they oftentimes are very separate. The beauty of this pattern of the macrocosm, the order of nature, is that what it does is it shows you that dotted line that connects the body to the mind, to the emotions, and to the soul through one system. So, for example, if we're looking at, say the planets or the elements, well, the planets and elements are incredibly rich with correspondences and associations and meaning and ways that they govern different facets of who we are. So, like the water element, right, creates a certain type of constitutional pattern. The way it relates to certain organ systems, like our lymphatic system, our urinary tract, our kidneys, our mucosal membranes, the reproductive system, the way it relates to our emotional being, right? The way water also carries, these teachings for us as a soul on this earth of how to live in harmony with that element. And the planets are the same way. As I said, that's really the basis of astrology, but a lot of people think of astrology just as, our psychological temperament or kind of our personality. But oftentimes it's overlooked that astrology also has this very physiological attribute as well, where each of the planets also govern, certain organ systems in the body, certain tissue types, certain pathological patterns. They create certain types of constitutions, but also relating to the psychological, spiritual sides as well. And so what this does for you as an herbalist is that when you integrate this pattern of the macrocosm and learn to see it within people, that you're learning to see what's behind the physiology, what's behind the psychology, what's behind everything that's going on, you're relating it to these archetypal forces of planets and elements. What this does is it gets you deeper, right? That you're able to see deeper into the underlying root cause of why is someone having the struggles that they're having. And that's really oftentimes a bulk of the really challenging work that we face as herbalists, right? Is figuring out what the heck is going on with this person so that I can help them. And what's so profound about this is that we're not seeing the person in isolation. We're viewing that person in their relationship to the totality of life, right? To the cosmos and to the earth, and seeing closer to their essence. And that takes our work with herbal medicine on a significantly deeper level, because now we're able to heal that person on more this vital, essential level that really creates a transformation for that person, right? It's not just putting a Band-Aid on their symptom, but it's literally transforming them on this deep archetypal level that is close to their essence. So, for example, if we are looking at a person and say they have chronic respiratory tract issues, right? Maybe they struggle with asthma and they get this bronchial constriction, and maybe they get really anxious and nervous, and their nervous system is really tight, right? They're really wound up tight and they're nervous and anxious all of the time. And maybe they perhaps complain about, difficulties with their communication and their self-expression, their ability to translate their inner world to the outer world through language, right? Well, so kind of looking at, the physical side, maybe the psychological, emotional side, and that spiritual side, that all has to do with Mercury, right? That is all of those things I just mentioned are governed by the planet Mercury. So, as an herbalist, sometimes we might say, oh, well, these herbs are good for asthma, and these herbs are good for nervousness, and I heard these herbs are good for, maybe helping you with communication and helping you in your mind, or these flower essences are good to help you feel like that you can express yourself. And that's all good. There's nothing wrong with that, except that oftentimes when we practice herbalism in that way, it doesn't work, right? It doesn't always work because that approach is just hitting the surface. What's behind that asthma? What's behind that constriction and tension in their lungs and in their nerves? What's behind that difficulty with communication? Well, according to the alchemical perspective, that we all contain these archetypal forces within us. We all have the planets. We all have the elements within us. It's all based on our relationship with those archetypes and our ability to embody and integrate and express those archetypes in their, for lack of a better term, highest virtue, their most virtuous expression. Each archetype has, we might say, a light side and a dark side, or a good way of expressing itself and maybe a not so good way of expressing itself in terms of whether it's in harmony with its greater environment or not. And so in this kind of example, we might say, oh, this person does not have a well-integrated Mercury, right? That Mercury is trying to convey a message to that person, ultimately by giving them a challenge of, hey, I want to work with you. I want to be in better relationship with you. I want you to be able to learn from me, but I kind of have to wake you up. I have to get your attention so that you can come to understand me and become more whole. And that really is the ultimate goal of alchemy, is wholeness. Healing is our ability to be in relationship and harmony and balance with these with the macrocosm, right? That the macrocosm and the microcosm are in perfect alignment and harmony. And when that occurs, it leads to ultimately a degree of spiritual illumination. And that really is there's a very medical aspect of alchemy, but again, there's also a spiritual aspect to it as well. And seeing that the evolution, our spiritual evolution and our healing journey are just two sides of the same leaf, as I always like to say. So just a little example there, looking at kind of the macrocosm in people and how this pattern of planets and elements really helps you to see the essence of what's going on with the person and to see the pattern of relationship between the physiology, the psychology, and the soul. And, this kind of blueprint or map applies equally to plants. So, when we're looking at a plant, oftentimes we're kind of seeing it in this we're seeing them separating kind of their different virtues and properties out. Like I had mentioned last week, we see the chemistry and the actions and the physical properties and the more subtle properties, and they're all kind of all over the place, and there isn't anything that brings them together. This was always a big challenge for me, actually, when I first started studying herbal medicine. I had a really difficult time learning about plants because it was like, just like I said, okay, here's all the chemicals, and here's how those chemicals bind in the body, and over here, here's all the herbal actions, and over here, here's the organ systems they hit, and over here, here's the symptoms they treat. And it was just felt all over the place. And to me, I personally learn best by seeing patterns. As soon as I can see a pattern in something, it all clicks and makes sense. And it wasn't until I really started to view plants through, for me in the beginning, it was through the lens of the elements, and really seeing, oh, there's, this plant has this fiery red color, and it has that spicy, hot, oily constituents in there that are pungent in their taste, and they move the blood, and they work on the heart, and they raise the internal temperature, and they're good for treating fever. It was like, oh, that's all fire element. And then it's like, oh, there's one pattern in the plant that's reflecting on all of these different scales and levels that we oftentimes study in herbal medicine. And so this is why I think having this lens of the planets and the elements really benefits us as an herbalist, because it helps us, again, see that relationship between, their morphology, their environment, their chemistry, their medicinal virtues, their actions, their energetics, to their psycho-spiritual properties. It weaves them all together, because according to alchemy, when we come into contact with the essence of the plant, there's an essence in there at the center of the plant. There is a singularity there, and that singularity is its medicine, and that singularity is also a pattern that is reflected in its planetary and elemental qualities and characteristics. And then that essence kind of radiates outwards and affects every attribute of that medicinal plant. And so when we begin to see the macrocosm in a plant, we're looking at it and we're saying, oh, what kind of element is present, is kind of dominant in this plant? What planet is dominant in this plant? And what that does is it allows you to understand how it's going to help a person on a much deeper level. So for example, if we're kind of using that mock example of the person with the asthma and the nervous system stuff, well, if we think of a herb like lobelia, right, it's a picture perfect expression of the planet Mercury, right? It has this very acrid flavor to it, right, that hits the back of the throat, kind of like bile rising up from your stomach. It's a relatively unpleasant taste to most people. But that acrid flavor indicates this very powerful relaxant antispasmodic property, right, with a very strong affinity for the lungs and the respiratory system and the nervous system, right? These are all mercurial attributes, right? Mercury tends to produce spasm and constriction and tension. Mercury rules the lungs and the respiratory system. It moves through the nervous system, and lobelia is hitting all of these levels. But at the same time, when we understand that, and there's a lot more that could be said about lobelia for sure, but this is just a very quick kind of snapshot of how you can see a planetary correspondence within a plant. So that gives you this understanding of, oh, lobelia is embodying that planet Mercury stronger than the other planets, right? It's like it's been stamped with that celestial influence. And because we understand that, now we're going to know that Mercury, or that lobelia being associated with Mercury, is going to be working through the psychological, emotional, and spiritual aspects of that planet as well, meaning that it's going to support with kind of the mind and cognition and thinking and language and communication and self-expression and, coordination within the body and our movements, and really our ability to, they say Mercury is the messenger of the gods. So the ability to move between the above and the below and the inner and the outer. So Mercury, it's like it teaches us how to bridge our inner world to the outer world through communication, through lots of different means of communication, right? Not just through words. And so that's just a little example of how you start to see the macrocosm, right? The order of creation and of life within the plant. And this is really the essence of how we classify and understand and categorize materia medica in the alchemical tradition, right? We're not just organizing it based on organ systems or actions or tastes or things like that. That's all super valuable. But in alchemy, we want to look at it. We want to look at that plant in its relationship to that underlying blueprint of nature and begin to understand them on not just one attribute, but the essence of that plant so that we can treat the essence of the person. So I know this is all sounding like very probably like, whoa, this sounds like way out there, or maybe kind of woo-woo or I'm flying at 5,000 feet above the earth here. But again, as I said, philosophy and practice, that in order for the practice of alchemy to be truly effective, that we have to understand what the meaning behind what we're doing is. And to me, if I was to really think and distill down, like, well, what is really kind of the essence of the philosophy of alchemy? This is it, to me, is these teachings of the macrocosm and the microcosm, and learning to see correspondences, patterns, relationships within nature, in people, and in plants. And the beauty of that to me is that while it can be a very intellectual system, alchemy, it's also a very heart-based system, right? That it's all about, because the mind divides and separates, the mind compartmentalizes things and works really through division and analysis and separation. It's the heart that allows us to perceive unity, to perceive relationship, to perceive correspondences and signatures in plants and in people. And so I love that this system is also really based on balancing our intellectual, rational faculties of the mind with the more receptive, intuitive faculties that are in the dominion of the heart. So the macrocosm and the microcosm, this lays the philosophical foundation for the ultimate practice of alchemy. But again, like all that philosophy is great, but how do we apply it? So as I said, alchemy is a system of medicine. It's a system of therapeutics. Ultimately, it's a system of pharmacy, right? Of working with the different aspects of nature and creating a medicine out of them according to this kind of cosmological framework of creation, of the way of the underlying pattern of the natural world. And in the realm of plants, that is what we refer to as spagyrics. Spagyrics is the specific branch of alchemy that works with the preparation of medicinal plants. So in next week's issue, I want to dig into spagyrics in a little bit more detail and share with you specifically how we take this understanding of the macrocosm and the microcosm and apply it to how you're going to work with medicinal plants to create herbal medicines, powerful herbal medicines that will heal the wholeness of the person because they contain the wholeness of the plant on a physical level, on an energetic level, and on a spiritual level. So be sure to tune into that issue of this series next week. Keep an eye on your inbox for that. I'll send you an email when it's all ready for you. And until then, I hope that hope the second part here in this series is inspiring you and is piquing your interest in terms of this integration of alchemy and herbal medicine, and you're starting to get a sense for how profound it really is and how it can truly benefit your work with medicinal plants. So thanks so much for tuning in with me. Blessings to you on your plant path today, and we'll see you next week with part 3 in the Alchemy and Herbalism series.